In every age, there is a room where power silently changes hands. In 1944, that room was Bretton Woods. Today, it might be Beijing. 8 decades ago, the dollar rose from the ruins of war to inherit an empire built on gold and blood. Now, the same forces that crowned it are eroding its throne. Debt has replaced discipline. Paper has replaced trust. And history, patient as ever, waits to rhyme again. For 500 years, global wealth has moved like the tide, each wave lifting one empire, then leaving it stranded on the sand. Portugal's ships, Spain's silver, Holland's banks, Britain's pound. America's dollar all believed they were the final chapter. None were. The dollar's strength was never divine. It was confidence, codified in green ink and backed by the promise that America would always pay. But when promise becomes policy and policy becomes debt, trust begins to bleed. In 2025, U.S. debt climbs past $36 trillion. The world watches as cracks appear in the foundation of its currency. Nations begin to hedge, to whisper of alternatives. And from the East, a new contender rises not through war, but through trade, through data, through quiet accumulation. The Chinese yuan, once dismissed as a provincial note, it now carries the ambitions of a civilization older than the West itself. It is not yet dominant, but neither was the dollar in 1939. History never shouts its transitions, it whispers them through interest rates, sanctions, and the subtle shift of trust. The dollar still reigns, but the horizon darkens. Every empire has believed it would outlast time. None have. Every empire thinks it invented money. None realize they merely borrowed it from history. In the 15th century, Portugal ruled the seas with maps and courage, trading faith for fortune. Then Spain learned to mine the earth itself, flooding markets with silver until its own wealth drowned in inflation. The Dutch built a republic of ledgers and logic, where paper became power and trust was stored in vaults of glass. Britain industrialized its ambition, wrapping the world in steam, colonies, and the pound. And America monetized the future, selling tomorrow to pay for today. Each believed their system eternal. Each fell when their currency became heavier than their labor, when trust became leverage, and debt became destiny. The pattern is not mystical, it is mathematical. Power expands faster than productivity, promises multiply faster than gold, and eventually the world begins to doubt. Then, quietly, the flow of trust reverses. Ships change flags, banks change reserves, and the story begins again. Now that mirror stands before Washington. The debt charts look like Spain's, the deficits echo Britain's. The military sprawl recalls Rome, and in Shanghai, the architects of the next order build, without fanfare, digital currency, gold-backed trade lanes, and energy priced in yuan. The old world calls it imitation. History calls it succession. Money has no soul. It lives only where trust resides. When trust migrates, empires follow. In every collapse, the numbers come last, the loss begins in belief. Portugal's sailors stopped trusting the crown. Spain's creditors stopped trusting repayment. Britain's colonies stopped trusting the pound. And now, the world begins to question the promise printed on every dollar. In God we trust. Which God? They asked the divine, or debt itself? For decades, the dollar was faith made tangible. Nations stored it as insurance against chaos. It bought oil, security, and time. But the modern world trades speed for certainty. Digital currency moves faster than diplomacy. The yuan is learning to speak this new language, programmable, transparent, untethered from the past. In Shanghai and Shenzhen, engineers design what Lisbon and London once conquered with ships. Not geography, but gravity, the gravity of trade. Trust is no longer built by armies, but by algorithms. The question is not whether America can print more dollars. It's whether the world still believes those dollars mean anything real. Because when faith shifts, collapse is not an event. It is a migration. And it has already begun. Every empire hides its power in the systems it builds. Rome taxed in gold. Britain ruled through banks. America controls through settlement. Every global payment flows through its veins. But the network that once secured dominance has become the source of decay. Sanctions meant to weaken enemies now push them toward alternatives. Every restriction breeds innovation. Russia learned to trade oil in yuan. Saudi Arabia sells to China in local currency. Central banks from Brazil to India experiment with digital swaps. The chain of the dollar weakens, not from rebellion, but from replacement. Control, once a weapon, becomes a liability. The yuan's rise is not about conquest, it's about code. China builds not an empire of land, but an empire of links, fiber, silicon, and ledgers that talk across borders. Its Belt and Road is no longer just steel and ports, it's servers and settlements, a silent architecture of influence. Yet, history warns, control breeds complacency. When power centralizes, entropy follows. The question is not whether China can build a new system. It's whether it can resist the arrogance that doomed every empire before it. For now, the cables hum quietly. The old system still functions. But under its circuits, a new pulse beats. Empires do not fall because they run out of money. They fall because they run out of faith in their own numbers. The United States borrows what no other nation dares, assuming the world will always lend. $36 trillion of promise, and counting. Interest has become the new tribute paid not to kings, but to creditors. Debt once built empires, now it binds them. The dollar was born from confidence and collateral. It now survives on reputation alone. Every trillion printed dilutes the memory of value. Yet the markets cheer, addicted to liquidity like lungs to air. They forget that air can thin. Inflation is not just higher prices, it is the erosion of trust disguised as prosperity. Meanwhile, China accumulates, not headlines, but assets, ports, mines, data centers, influence. It lends where the West hesitates, collects where the West forgets. The yuan grows not by conquest, but by collection. Each loan, each digital ledger, another thread in a web of quiet dependence. Empires collapse slowly, then suddenly. The first cracks never make noise. They appear in spreadsheets, in treasury auctions, in the eyes of investors who stop believing. When the numbers no longer add up, the empire that wrote them begins to fade. Power rarely dies with a bang. It drifts, unnoticed, until absence feels normal. The dollar's dominance is not vanishing. It's thinning, like air at high altitude. In 2000, 70% of global reserves were in dollars. Now, barely 58%. The fall is not dramatic. It is gravitational. Nations quietly rebalance. Saudi Arabia signs UN oil deals. Brazil settles trade in local currency. And the BRICS bloc knits a financial web beyond Washington's reach. The U.S. still holds the mightiest military. But tanks cannot defend trust. Sanctions, once tools of control, have become lessons in independence. Each time America freezes assets, another country learns to live without them. And while Western leaders debate, engineers in Asia build. BRICS bridge, digital settlement systems, new rails for old trade. It looks technical, harmless, dull. So did the first paper note in Amsterdam. The transfer of power is never loud because noise attracts resistance. Instead, it unfolds beneath routine headlines, disguised as efficiency, innovation, progress. But progress always chooses a language. For 5 centuries, that language was English. Soon, it may be Mandarin. For centuries, the world moved in singular rhythms, one empire, one currency, one story. But the new century refuses the symmetry. Power no longer wears a single flag. It fractures into constellations. The yuan does not seek to replace the dollar. It seeks to coexist, to dilute. Multipolar finance is not war. It is entropy, the slow redistribution of certainty. In Africa, Chinese credit builds rails and roads once financed by London. In the Middle East, oil contracts whisper in multiple languages. In Latin America, settlements occur in local tokens pegged to baskets of trade. The map of money is no longer drawn in lines, but in circuits. America's greatest weapon was simplicity, everything priced in one unit, one trust. But simplicity ages into rigidity. Complexity, though fragile, adapts. The yuan's ambition is not dominance, but endurance. It grows where the dollar cannot go into sanctioned economies, unbanked regions, digital corridors, and, like every new power, it carries both promise and peril. Because a multipolar world is not freer, it is less predictable. The sun is rising, but the light is divided. Every empire mistakes calm for control. The dollar still trades, the markets still hum, and investors still speak the old language of yield. But beneath the surface, the rhythm falters. When confidence decays, collapse arrives as routine. The Roman denarius debased slowly, century by century. The pound withered through war debts, not revolution. The dollar's decay will not roar, it will sigh. Each interest rate cut, each bailout, each quiet debt ceiling deal is a verse in the same old poem, denial disguised as management. Meanwhile, Beijing plays the long game, accumulating gold, testing digital yuan pilots across ASEAN, Africa, and the Gulf. It does not need to dethrone the dollar to win. It only needs to offer an alternative that feels safer, newer, more real. Stability is perception, and perception is the first casualty of doubt. When central banks diversify, they are not making policy, they are confessing fear. The dollar's value endures not because it is strong, but because alternatives have been weak. That era is ending. Stability is cracking, and through the cracks, light escapes. Collapse never begins with crisis, it begins with disbelief. The faith that once united nations around the dollar now splinters into pragmatism. Central banks diversify, corporations hedge, citizens quietly convert savings into metal, land, or code. Money, once a promise of unity, becomes a mirror of fear. History repeats not because people forget, but because power convinces them this time is different. Portugal believed its roots eternal, Spain believed its silver infinite, Britain believed its empire divine. America believes its debt sustainable, each conviction a prelude to reckoning. The yuan's rise is not yet victory, but validation proof that the world is ready for an alternative. Yet, new trust must still be earned. For the yuan to lead, it must do what no empire has managed, inspire belief without domination. That is, the paradox of power control destroys confidence. The question for the century ahead is not who prints the world's money, but who the world believes when numbers fail. Empires die when their currency becomes language without meaning. History's rhythm is cruel but constant. No currency rules forever. The dollar's twilight does not signal destruction. It marks succession. When empires fall, what truly dies is their illusion of permanence. America once inherited Britain's crown, not by conquest, but by exhaustion. Now, as the century bends toward Asia, a similar transfer unfolds not in treaties, but in transactions. The yuan's ascent is not inevitable, yet its momentum is undeniable. It carries the patience of a civilization that measures time in dynasties, not decades. Still, it too will face the test that undoes all empires. Can prosperity survive pride? Every system begins as innovation and ends as dogma. The United States mistook privilege for principle. China risks mistaking control for confidence. Between them lies the narrow path of adaptation. The true reserve currency of the future will not be printed, it will be trusted. Perhaps it will be digital, decentralized, or something unimagined. But it will still answer to the same ancient law: money is faith, and faith must be earned. The question is not whether the dollar falls or the yuan rises, it is whether humanity learns before the next collapse. If this story awakens that awareness in even one mind, then history has not been wasted. Like, share, and subscribe, not for algorithms, but for understanding. Because awareness, not wealth, is the first step toward survival.